What's up? Welcome back. In this episode, we're going to talk about setting up a multi-tenant authentication system using Auth0 with organizations in a Rails application. So we've already got two things set up. We set up Auth0 for just basic login, and we set up custom subdomain routing for different sites. And what we're going to add today is the ability to go through and sign up to one of these custom sites that we're going to be routing to the subdomain for. So if we go to the first thing we want to do is head over to the Auth0 page again and go back to our applications. And you'll notice that when you set up a brand new application, so remember that we have this Rails simple demo going on. If you look under the organizations tab, an organization is going to represent a site in our case. An organization in your use case, that might be a team or an account or an org, right? Kind of like the GitHub organization. In our case, each organization is going to represent a site. And so each organization has a subdomain in our system. But in order to use organizations with this Rails simple demo, we need to disable a bunch of grants. So we want to disable a bunch of these grants. Now, what is tough about this is that when we disable the grants for the Rails simple demo application, that means that we will not be able to use the management API inside of Auth0 with the same credentials as our Rails simple demo authentication thing. So what we want to do instead is we want to go to our applications, and we're going to create a brand new application called a machine-to-machine application. So this is going to be like our Rails multi-tenant, whatever demo, and we're going to create a new machine-to-machine application. And the API we want to use is the Auth0 management API. We're going to filter down to organizations, and we actually want all of the organization, we want all of the organization permissions. We also want connections. We also want all the connection permissions, and we're going to say authorize. When you create a brand new machine-to-machine application, it's going to give you a client ID and client secret that you can use in order to make API calls to the Auth0 API. Now, there is an Auth0 Ruby client. It is called the Ruby Toolkit for Auth0. And so we are going to use this gem today. So we're going to say bundle add auth0. Let's see. Bundle add auth0. We also need to open up our credentials file and add in our machine-to-machine client ID and client secret. Editor. Okay, we're going to open this up, and we're going to add our machine-to-machine client ID and our machine-to-machine client secret, and we're going to use the same domain. So let's go back over here. We're going to go to settings, and we're going to grab our client ID, and we're going to grab our client secret. Again, I'm going to just delete these apps, so no need to copy. Okay. The next thing we want to do is we want to move these login and logout button concepts into each of the sites. So recall, if we go to /sites, we can see the list of, if we have the server running. If we go to /sites, we see the list of sites. So we can go to our test site, or we can go to another site here, and that shows us the two different sites. Now, what we want to do is on the site show page, we're going to add login and logout buttons. So the same way that we had our login and logout buttons on the root here, we're going to move these into the site show page. Okay. When we go to something like test.lvh.whatever, now we have these login and logout buttons. So if we click login right now, we're going to get an error, and that's because our redirect URI is set to http://test.lvh.me:3000. So right now, our application does not support that redirect URI. So we're going to go back to our multi-demo for a Rails simple web demo. This is our web application. We now want to go into our settings, and we're going to scroll down to the section where we set up our URLs earlier. Remember that these URLs were our allowed callback URLs. Now, inside of our allowed callback URLs, we need to specify the callbacks that are going to be used for our organization-specific routes. And so the way this works is we're going to say lvh.me, because that's the domain we're testing with, and we can add an organization URL parameter. So here we can say organization name .lvh.me / whatever. So this allows us to be, it allows us to use this subdomain routing with our allowed callback URLs. Okay, so that is fine. We're going to click on Save Changes. Now, when we refresh this page, we should see, okay. We don't see that. Okay, so let's go back to test.lvh.me, click on Login. Something went wrong. Redirect URI in the callback didn't match. Oh, right. Okay, so it still doesn't match because there is no organization inside of auth0 that has the name test, right? And so because we don't have that organization name of test set up yet inside of auth0, it's still saying, hey, that's not a valid redirect URI. So what we need to do is every time we create a site with a subdomain, we want to register that subdomain as an organization of auth0. And so we can do that with the auth0 API directly. So inside of the site model, what I want to do is something like, I don't know, after commit, we'll say ensure auth0 org ID. And we could do it on create, but I also like, whatever, yeah. Ensure, what is that? So we're going to say return if auth0 org ID. If there's an org ID, then whatever, we'll just like go to the next thing. Otherwise, we want to create a new auth0 org. So we're going to use the auth0 client, and we're going to call .create organization, and the name is going to be subdomain, and the display name is going to be name. And we'll come back and look at all the settings for what we need to pass into the organization. So we're sort of skipping ahead a little bit here. Where does this auth0 client come from? Well, we're going to define a new auth0 client here. So we're going to say def auth0 client. And now we're going to use that Ruby gem. So we can go over to the Ruby gem and look at how we initialize an auth0 client. So we're going to say something like this. And it's also going to have a domain and maybe some other stuff we'll talk about in a minute. Okay, so our auth0 client, yeah, so it has a domain, also has API version and whatever, timeout. Sure, that's fine. Okay, so this Ruby client ID is going to come from our machine-to-machine client ID, Rails, the application.credentials, auth0, machine-to-machine client ID, and the same thing here, client secret. The domain is going to be the same as our other domain, auth0 domain, that's good. Okay, so now we should have an auth0 client that we can use to call create organization, and then we want to update the auth0 org ID to be this org ID here. All right, so in order to make this all work, we have to restart the Rails server. The other thing we can do is go inside of the Rails console, find our site, .s is site.last, looks like maybe we're missing a comma. Oops. Reload. Okay, so s.save, bang. Credentials, I spelled that wrong somewhere. Credentials. Okay, so s.touch is just a way to update it and change the updated at field, basically, which will cause this to be committed to the database. And after commit, we're doing this ensure thing. And that ensure thing caused a new, caused our method here to fire, our method for ensure auth0 org. There was no auth0 org present, so it used the API to make an API call to create a new organization. So now we have this org ID. And now if we look at s.auth0 org ID, we now see this org ID is here. This is the identifier inside of Auth0 that we're going to use for the organization. So if I go over to organizations now, we should see this brand new organization was created here for another. So s.name is another. Cool. And if we look into this, we should see, yeah, so the name is another. That's cool. So now we can, let's see, like s equals site.first. S.name is test. So now we'll say s.touch, and that should save that. And now we should have like another org, or we should have a test org. Okay, so now we have two orgs down here. We have another and we have test. Great. Now if we go back to our demo here, so now remember that we should have a test subdomain and we have an org with that test subdomain. So when we click login, we should have been able to log in here. So redirect URI is test.lvh.me, auth0. Okay. We should not have a mismatch. Why do we have a mismatch? Callback URL. Oh, right. Okay. So inside of our site show page, we copied these buttons over for login and logout. However, when we're working with an organization, we need to pass some extra parameters. So as part of this post request, we're also going to include params, and this is where we're going to specify our organization ID and also the return URI. So we're going to say organization is at site.auth0 org ID. The redirect URI is going to be something with the auth callback. So if we were to go over here and say localhost 3000/blah, then we want auth or just callback. Okay, so this is the auth0 callback path. So we should be able to say auth0 callback path with subdomain site.subdomain. And we want to change this to URL. And I think that should give us what we want. Okay, so let's give this a spin. So test.lvh.me. Let's look at what was actually put in here. So yeah, the callback, that looks right. So test.lvh.me 3000 auth0 callback. So now we click on login and invalid request, no connections enabled for the client. Okay, so when we create an organization, by default, there are no connections set up. The connections are like all the different ways you can log in. And so to enable a connection, what we need to do is make another API call that will set up the connections for our organization. So if we go back to this site.rb, so in addition to creating the org, we also want to create and enable organization connections. And so let's see, how do we want to do that? Right, so to get the connections, I think, let's jump into the Rails console here and say site.last.auth0 client s. Okay, so if we say s.auth or like s.get connections, this should give us back the list of connections that are supported. Connections. In practice, like I feel uncomfortable about putting all of this auth0 specific stuff inside of the site. We should probably move this to some sort of service or something, but whatever. For now, this will work fine. So we're going to say, give us the connections just give us all the connections. And yeah, we'll just say at connections or equals auth0 client connections. And we want to map over those. So connections.each do connection. For each connection, we want to call auth0 client.create. It's like s.add. Yeah, add organizations enabled connection. And we need to pass it the org ID and the connection ID. The method is add organizations enabled connection. And nope, that's not the wrong. Okay, so add. So it's an alias for this create organizations enabled connection. So let's use that. And it takes in the organization ID, connection ID, and this assign membership on login, which we do want to be true because we want people who sign up to become members of this organization so that we can tell which users of the of Auth0 that we have that have authenticated are members of which organization. And so I think this should work. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to go back into Auth0 and delete these organizations so that we can start over. So we're going to delete this, and we're going to delete this. And we're going to go back into here and say site.update all auth0 org ID is nil. Okay, so now if we say site.first, so that we're working with test, s.touch. So that should fire off the API call to create the org. The org came back. Now let's look and see if that org has any connections. So we're going to refresh our list of orgs. We see test is here, and it should have some connections. It does not have connections. What happened there? Oh, did we not reload? S is site.update all, exit, delete. We got to go delete this organization, try again. Okay, reloading Rails console, site.update all, auth0 org is nil, and then we're going to say site.first.touch. Okay, that created an org. Refresh the page over here. We see test, and let's see if it has any connections. Boom. Okay, so it's got 2 connections. Great. Google OAuth and username and password. That's amazing. All right, so now if we come back over here and go to testlvh.me and click login, fingers crossed, boom, look at that. We see it. Okay, this is great. This is amazing. Okay, so now we can log in and say, or actually, yeah, let's log in and say wave@cjav.dev. Okay. So we are now logged into test. Let's go back, or actually, yeah, let's go back to the root here. If we click login, we should already be logged in. We're brought to the dashboard. Cool. You'll notice that there is an org ID here. So this org is like the org that this specific user is a member of. So if we now go back to, if we go to another and click login, we should not be logged in. And we're not able to actually see the login flow because we haven't created the org for another. So we'll say s is site.last, s.touch. That should fire up and create the org for another. Now we'll click login. This time I'm going to use Google OAuth. So I'm going to go through the Google flow. And now I'm logged in with my Google account. So what's cool about this is that we're logged in on another page. So if I go to /dashboard, we are logged in. And if we go to test, we can go to dashboard and we're logged in as a different user. So this allows us to kind of log into all these different websites with different authentication credentials. So let's go back to lvh.me/sites, /sites, and let's add a new site. New, and we're going to say test 3, testing 3. Let's make this one have, I don't know, a pinkish background and a light blue primary color, create site. And okay, so now we've got this. This is cool. So now if we click login, this should just work because we wired up. Oh, actually, no, hold on. We're on sites 3. So we want to go to test3.lvh.me. In fact, let's make it so that after you create the site, we're redirected to the, well, we could do that in a minute, whatever. So this should work because we're on test3.lvh.me. If we click login, now we're brought through the login flow to authenticate. Couple other cool things that we can do. So when we create the enabled connection, or when we create the organization right out of the box, here we can specify the name, subdomain, and display name, but we can also pass like a few other things. So if we go to the auth0 organization API ref, then here under the management API where we say create organizations, we will see all of the arguments that we can pass. Okay, so under branding, we can pass a logo URL, colors. You can even pass some metadata. Oh, wow, enabled connections. Okay, so that's what we actually want to do, is pass in the enabled connections as we're creating the organization. I didn't realize you could do that all in one call. All right, so let's modify our implementation so that it passes in some branding. So we're going to say branding, colors. We won't have a logo right now, but that's fine. So we're going to have a primary color, and that's going to be primary color. And then we're also going to have the page background, which is going to be our background color. And what I didn't realize is that we can have this enabled connections thing. So enabled connections, which is a list of connections. And it looks like we need their connection ID, and then we want to pass that as true. And then connection ID is going to be the IDs from this connections method. So let's actually make this connections method map over each connection. Yeah, and grab the IDs out. Yeah, that looks good. That looks great. Okay, so, well, actually, let's make it map to this sort of shape here. So we'll say, okay, give me back something that looks like connection ID and assign membership on login true. So now we should be able to say connections like this. And now we can remove these two API calls as separate calls. But what we could do also is like allow the user when they're signing up to select which types of connections they want to have their end users log in with. Because some sites are going to want you to log in with Twitter, or they're going to want you to log in with, GitHub or whatever. So, okay. Right. So now when we go back to sites, let's go also to our sites controller. Let's update this so that we redirect to site root for the subdomain of the site's subdomain, so that when we create a new site here, which is going to be like, I don't know, fun site. Okay, whatever. Boom and boom. All right, create site. Oh no, undefined method site root URL. I think it created it anyways. So let's look at fun site. Because we were using localhost, it didn't work because fun was not the subdomain. Fun.localhost is the domain. There's no subdomain in that case. But now we see fun.lvh.me, and we should be able to log in immediately. And look at that, it even changed our color. So now the background is green and the button is yellow because that matches our site colors. So now we have narrowed down our implementation to just a single API call to create an organization. We save that off on the site. Now we have like a full tenant authentication system, which is really cool. The one last thing that I wanted to do before we run is set it up so that we can see the list of members on the site page. So let's actually just make another method here, members, and we're going to say auth0 client.get or .members, I think. We should be able to say members for organization auth0 org ID, I think. Let's see. So site show. So here we'll just say at site.members and local or test.lvh.me and undefined method members for auth client. Okay. So what is it? What is the method called? Get organization members. All right, let's see. Bad request. Oh, maybe we just passed the org ID like this. There we go. Okay, so now we have a member. You can see their email address. So let's make this a little bit cleaner. .map m email. I don't know. Okay, so that's the member. Now if we go to another location here, now we see that has cjvilla at Gmail. So they each have different members. We have full multi-tenant auth. Hopefully this was useful. Thanks so much for watching, all the support. Really appreciate it. If you're enjoying this kind of content, please like and subscribe. I think this is actually going to wrap this part of the series. I'm working on building an application that I don't want to show the whole thing built on screen, but I'm going to try to show bits and pieces as I work through figuring out some of those pieces. So thanks so much for watching. Really appreciate it. If you have ideas for content or things that you'd like to see, I'm all ears. Some things fit in nicely with stuff I'm working on. Other things are going to take me a little bit longer to get to, but know that I do see and read all the comments. So really appreciate it. Thanks, and we'll see you in the next one.